Hi, I'm here with Matt Lehrman from Social Prosperity Partners. Good to see you, Matt.
Hi, Steve. Nice to see you.
We've known each other for a long time, and one thing that always intrigued me with you was how you learned. Like, you never give up learning. You're always learning every single day. Something new comes up, you're always refining things. And so we're going to talk about that today. But before we get to that point, can you give me a sense of what you're doing these days? Because I know things kind of change periodically. So what are you up to right now?
Yeah, well, it's a learning process and it's a continual innovation process. So my business right now is called Social Prosperity Partners, and I work as a consultant on strategic planning and meeting facilitation for all kinds of municipalities and nonprofits and for companies. But the this is what I am today. It was a little bit different yesterday. It might even be a little bit different tomorrow because I'm just not locked into one thing. I'm always looking for where we go with this. So at the moment, Social Prosperity Partners is all about facilitation and helping people reach agreement about what they're trying to do. I guess that's my gift is I help other people find clarity in their objectives, but my challenge is that I don't have clarity in my objectives. It's a continual ongoing exploration.
What sort of sparks or initiates your, yeah, I think I'm going to pivot over here just a little bit. What do you have to learn in that process to say, I might be going in the wrong direction, but this might be a better direction?
I first off have to just explain that, well, you might know my dad is a visual artist. He was a painter. And so he talks about this very thing in terms of painting, in that every time he sits down to create a painting, he has an idea of what it's going to be, but it's not until he puts brush to paper and he sees how the color comes out and how the paper absorbs it that he sees what the painting is going to be. And I'm not an artist like that in any sense of the word, but that's kind of my internal sense of how I draw connection, which is, for me, it's a lot of writing. I have to sit down and write a website. I have to write a marketing description of whatever is the promise that I want to make. And I always start with the marketing. I always start with the description of the end result, and then I figure if I can write something that is compelling, that answers some buyer's question of why do I care? If I can answer that, then I figure I can back into the the how do I deliver on that promise. But for me, it's you have to be able to make that promise first.
I want to go backwards a little bit. This is a story I haven't heard from you about your father. Can you tell me, like, how did you learn that? Did you sit by his side while he's doing his artwork? Did you ask him later in life? Like, how did you pick that up, and how did you kind of continually learn about how to think like an artist but act like a business person?
Well, yeah, that's so we're gonna do the full psychoanalysis here, I guess.
There
Uh,
you go.
my parents were actually in business together when I was a kid. Their business was called Design Unlimited, and they worked mostly in the hospitality industry, doing graphic designs for restaurants and the hotel industry. And the way it worked out was my dad was a graphic designer. This is long before computers, by the way, when things were hand drawn and mechanicals were pasted together. And then mom came into the business in the sales capacity, and she is a fearless salesperson in her own right. So it was this marriage of artistic vision and sales and business ability. That's what I grew up with, and I try to be a combination of these two things. So I have none of the artistic ability, but if you ever need someone to assemble a committee to put things together, I'm your man. And I think the time that it actually became obvious to me, there was kind of a twofold way. One was growing up, I would go with my folks to the annual hotel motel restaurant show, and I would be a salesperson with them. They'd have a 30-foot booth, and all the restaurant people, all the hotel people would walk by, and we were there selling the business and representing it and putting brochures into people's hands and selling phase ones and just being out there. And my sales ability, that was a natural. I'm a people person. I'm happy to talk to them. But couple that with going to a museum with my dad, even as a kid, and asking him to describe what he saw in a painting, in a sculpture, or whatever. And what I discovered is he has the ability to see more depth and more there's more going on in what he sees than what I see. His eye is trained to see the brush strokes and the perspective that the artist was going for. There was something deeper here. And like I said, I can't do it myself, but I've learned to see that what an artist knows is how to take what they see and represent it in its own reality. And so I think of that kind of artistic vision is very much what you need in a business sense as well. It's the ability to look at a situation and ask the question, what do you think people need in this moment? So Steve, a few years ago, I was teaching a class on arts entrepreneurship at ASU and at Arizona State University. And on the very first day, the very first exercise that I did for the students, they came into the room, I walked in, I did this within the first 5 minutes of when they arrived. I sent them all away. I said, come back in a half an hour. And in a half an hour, you have to go out and find some entrepreneurial opportunity. You've got to go out and find some need that exists somewhere. And in 30 minutes, you have to come back and tell us what is the need that you've identified. And in a half an hour, 30 kids came back into class, and not everyone could do this because not everyone has the ability to look and see that there's a need here. But if you can go out and you can see people who are thirsty, or people who are hungry, or people who are trying to get from one building to another in a really quick way, people who need a ride, people, people who need a pen as they're going into class, people who need help carrying their books, whatever is the thing that you might see on a college campus. If you can find need, then you can build a business after that. That's kind of the essence of entrepreneurial spirit. But I think of that as being grounded in the artistic ability to see something that's interesting or beautiful or unique or worth capturing in some way.
Fascinating. I never thought about it that way, but it's sort of like this notion of being able to see things that other people don't see and to act on it, which is something that you do extremely well, is that, and I didn't realize that it had this artistic foundation in your life. It's actually fascinating.
I can't say that it was obvious to me while I was doing it, but in retrospect, it seems to make a lot of sense.
No, it does. It does. So, obviously along your journey, as you've moved, for, having jobs to starting a company and then moving on into the various stages in your career, when something new came to you, what did you have to do to learn it? I mean, you've been this prolific learner around social media. You have learned everything you possibly can. And there's some finance stuff I'm sure you've learned along the way.
Mhm.
But when you had to learn something, what did you do? And can you give me some good concrete examples of something you didn't know how to do and you figured out how to do it?
Yeah, there's no one answer to it. It kind of depends on what I needed to learn. There was a time early on in my career that I realized I didn't know basic things about how the economy worked, and later I hadn't ever learned how to read a financial statement. And those were two examples where I just enrolled in classes at the community college. And one I took was macroeconomics. I took microeconomics when I was in college, but I never took macro. And I then took a course on reading financial statements just because I needed that kind of a thing. And the community college was an easy, obvious way to get clear instruction. But separate from that, um, I, for me, the most important thing is talking with other people who know stuff and who can give advice about what I need to know going forward. So let me give an example. When I graduated college, I moved to Washington, D.C. And all I knew was that I wanted to be a lobbyist and I wanted to do it in representing some business interest. And this was 1984, pre-internet, of course. And so I sent letters to people who were the vice president of government affairs. Ultimately, I reached 100 different trade associations. I went from the American Petroleum Institute to the Chocolate Manufacturers Association because I just wanted to find out what they did. So I wrote to them, I said, would you be willing to meet with me? I'm a recent college graduate. I'm interested to know, what do you do and what suggestions you would have for someone like me to do it? I spent 4 months doing nothing but sending out letters, following up with a phone call, getting appointments to see people. And every appointment, I would ask those questions. Tell me what you do. Tell me what advice you would have for someone like me who wants to do that. And then the last question was always, who else would you suggest I speak with? And ideally, my goal was to leave with two recommendations, because if I came in with one contact and they gave me two more, then my network grew, which is how over 4 months, I visited with 100 people. And at the end of 4 months, one of those people called me back up and he said, "Hey, Matt, uh, I happen to hear from someone that's looking to hire someone and you might be the right person for them." And that's how I found my first job when I got out of college. It was about making a connection and asking, not just, this wasn't like just asking people like in a Machiavellian way, just to like make a contact. This was about really trying to understand the advice that they had, learn from it, and apply it going forward. And people respond genuinely to it. And I have to say, that same attitude is my entire career. I mean, I'm kind of fearless about sending an email or picking up the phone and calling someone and introducing myself and saying, "I just want to ask you a couple of questions about the work that you do, the background you had, your perspective on something. Would you mind sharing that with me?" And people are actually pretty generous about willing to talk about themselves if you are sincere about asking them meaningful questions. And so everything that I've gotten really, what's the line from the movie? I've always relied on the kindness of strangers. I'm like a living embodiment of that. I've gotten so much from just calling people and asking for insights. And I'm a lot smarter because all that wisdom has been shared with me.
Yeah, a lot of students should learn that from you because a lot of them just go look for jobs. And this notion of doing this,
Yeah, in fact, I would go out and do those meetings. I wouldn't even take a resume with me
yeah, that's
because
great.
it's too dangerous to just want to lay the resume on someone's desk and say, "I'm looking for a job. Do you know anyone or do you
Yeah.
have one?" And that's not the question.
Yeah. So in those days, there was no internet. Well, there was, but we weren't able to access it. And so now there's like tons of content out there. There's webinars, there's TED Talks, there's books, there's whatever. Do you navigate that? Is that something, is that a resource for you? And why do you go to the internet versus making calls to 100 people?
Yeah. So that's a really good question. Yeah, of course. I watch TED Talks, I read books, um, I'm always Googling whatever the topic is and looking for who's written on this, or sometimes it's as simple as what does Wikipedia say about this, just to get a general sense. And that's all good. But honestly, it leaves me flat because there's a difference between information and wisdom, yeah, it's called information and wisdom, which is, it's not just information that I'm looking for. I'm not just looking for the answer to a question. I'm looking for, what does it mean? What can I do with it? How does this correlate to something else that's going on in the world? What makes this timely or opportune in this moment? And that's the kind of thing you can only get by actually talking to someone who is engaged with it. It's why, for me, going to a conference and sitting in the bar and having a glass of wine and turning to the person next to you and finding out that they bring some totally different perspective to whatever it is you're talking about is incredibly valuable. So going to conferences, attending classes or summits or meetings, the engagement of other people, for me, that's where the real richness comes, because I don't just need the facts. I need, how are people relating to this and what are they doing with it in this moment? If I was looking for a metaphor here, Steve, this is the difference between jumping into the water and surfing the wave. And I'm much more interested in surfing the wave. I want to know who's a thought leader on this. What are they doing with this, and which way is it going? I want to be up there balancing on the board with them.
So now, and hopefully this won't last very long, but now that we're in this sort of lockdown phase, how do you do it? Like, I know that the reaching out to people and talking to 100 people is a lot easier than
Mhm.
maybe it was to go to Washington and go knocking on doors. But how do you do that now, both sitting at a conference or whatever? Are you going to these workshops and conferences and you finding people, or how does that work?
Okay, so you might have just revealed this is a do as I say, not as I do moment, because I actually did it in the reverse. The minute that COVID hit, I was really, because I'm an independent business person. People aren't calling me all the time. I'm calling them. And I was really concerned, how do I stay relevant? Not just how do I be relevant to others, but how do I even stay relevant in my head? So what I did was I started offering a webinar. And in fact, I offered the first one at the end of March. So just what, less than a month into the lockdown, I offered a webinar called How to Sustain Donors in Turbulent Times. And I called up, I think in the end, I did it with 30 state nonprofit associations all over the country. And I offered myself at no charge. I said, you go and present this. If you're charging people, I don't mind, whatever you need to do, but I'd like to offer you this webinar for your members because I know that nonprofits are particularly stressed right now. Well, I went and taught this. I had some I had a dozen, some I had 50 or 100 or more attendees with it. But it put me into the middle. I became the forum for, well, what are you doing? How are you addressing this? What questions are pressuring you right now? I'm kind of insistent upon doing post-webinar evaluations. And one of the questions I ask is, what other questions should we be exploring? And so I took all of that and created a second webinar that was just designed to answer the most common questions that came out of the first webinar. And I created one called How to Ask for Money in Tough Times. And because that's what people really wanted to know. And I filled it with examples that people shared with me of what was working for them in this moment. So here we are, as you and I are having this conversation, it's mid-November. I've taught about 50 webinars in the last 5 or 6 months now, I guess since the end of March. And I've reached literally hundreds or probably thousands of people at this point. And I have to say, yes, I'm teaching, but I have to say it's a massive learning experience for me because I can put something out there and I get people responding to me in real time with, this is what this means for them, and this is where they're going for it. And I don't know about you, but I think everyone knows something. So take what you know, share it, even if you're doing it for free, and let the feedback be your payment, because you will learn a tremendous amount from it.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. I think that your deep curiosity is what drives you to learning. I mean, you seem to be curious, no matter, you said, whether you're sitting at a bar, whether you're picking up the phone and calling 100 foundations, or even you teaching and learning from the people you're teaching, which is just an amazing opportunity to grab onto new ideas and information. It's fascinating.
Thank you. I'm looking off to my side here because I have a vision board that I keep right here on my desk,
Yeah.
and my vision board for the year 2020 has, among other things on it, the words "Ask better questions." Because this was the year, even before the pandemic, this was the year that I had committed to myself that if I was really going to transform my career and what I'm doing with my business and all of that, that I need to ask better questions. And oftentimes that means ask questions of better people, people who are even wiser, who have greater perspective and can steer you in new ways. So I'm continually trying to ask better questions.
Is it hard to find those people? Not to be in your webinars, but to ask smarter people or people who have more experience.
No, the whole world is filled with smarter people and people who have far more experience than I. If the only question is, do you have the gumption to send an email to someone or pick up the phone and call someone who you don't know and say, "Hey, can I ask you a question?" And in my early part of my career, I was in sales, and one of the things you get is calluses around your heart. So, you know, at some point you just go, why wouldn't I ask? Why wouldn't they want to talk to me? Of course, I'm willing to write to them and ask. And look, especially now when all of us are working out of our homes, what else do you have to do? You got time to talk to people.
Yeah. I want to go back a little bit when you were teaching that class and when you sent people out to come up with their entrepreneurial ideas based on what they saw in their short travels. So how do you teach? How do you become curious? Are people, is that just a skill that only a certain sliver of the population has? Or if I'm not all that curious, like, how do you become more curious and that how, instead of just saying you ask better questions, how might you help other people ask better questions?
Hmm. You know, I bet if I pulled out my syllabus from that class, that I think I'm right. I think I included in the syllabus like 3 or 4 key questions that you need to ask if you're going out trying to be entrepreneurial. And forgive me, I can't pull them
Okay.
off the top of my head, but let's see. I mean, the skill is, show me someone who needs something. When I was in college, I had a professor in public policy, and his bottom line question for everything was, "Why do I care?" And so I kind of bring that "Why do I care" philosophy to entrepreneurship as well, which is, it's not enough that you go out there and you've got a cooler full of cold ice water, and I live in the desert, so cool ice water on a hot August day should be great. But why should I care is the question you have to answer from a potential customer's perspective. So maybe I would just boil it down to, if you can answer the question, why should someone care about this, then you're on the track to figuring out where that entrepreneurial opportunity is. But it all comes down to figuring that one need out.
Yeah, but it goes to this notion of a combination of curiosity and empathy, right? So like you want to think like other people. Is there any tricks that you have besides asking questions that gets you to get yourself out of your head and be in the head of the people you're asking?
I wish I had a formula for it, Steve. I'll say, I know that there are other entrepreneurs who would have a better discipline about this than I think I'm much more basic, which is, if I suspect that there's a need out there, then I'm going to go back and I'm going to write up my marketing plan or write up my test advertisement or whatever, and I'm going to go out there and test it and try to see if it's a hook that any fish wants to bite. But for me, it's continual testing. So, for example, I own a URL that has a really great brand. It's a great brand name, but I don't have a use for it at the moment. I've never figured out what to do with this. But occasionally, I've gone on Facebook and I've bought Facebook ads where I just set up a dummy one page that just said, under construction, leave your name and email address if you want to know when we're ready. And I would go out and I would advertise this URL. And there were only 2 things that I wanted to see, which was, one, how many people would click the URL? And then 2, how many people, once they clicked the URL, would actually sign up to hear what the coming attraction was. And I figured, if ever I could find a time where I could make a pitch that had a really significant return on investment, either the people would come and check it out or that they would sign up for it, then I would have identified a need that was worth filling. But I have to say, I still own the URL. I have not created a business around it. But one of these days, I'm going to figure out how to bait that hook in a way that people want, and then I'll have a successful business. But until then, I don't know.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, this sort of an interesting way of, I mean, it's free to test ideas these days, right? You don't have
Mhm.
to spend any money to test ideas like that way. That's a fascinating way of sort of like, did it work? Did you ever get huge amounts of interest?
Never got huge amounts of interest. I did get some interest. And one of the advantages of using Facebook was, I learned something about the demographics of who was attracted to this. And that was also a good learning experience as well. But, maybe this is also to your point, is sometimes I'm about learning for the sake of learning. I mean, I don't have the end result in mind. I'm just interested in throwing the fish or throwing the hook into the water and see if anyone bites, just because it's a good learning experience. And I might have spent $50 or $100 on it. But you know what? That was a weekend's entertainment budget. And it gave me a month of just trying to learn something useful that may or may not be helpful to me going forward.
One of the things I was intrigued with, this connection between your father having all these things in his head, not knowing what he's going to paint or draw, and then placing it on some kind of a canvas. For
Mhm.
you, it's the writing and the massaging of writing, and then at some point that writing will emerge out to be something you feel proud and comfortable with. Does that correlation make sense to you?
Yeah, I'm all about making the promise, make the bold promise first, and then you have to live up to the promise. It's kind of the same thing that my mother told me when I graduated college. And in fact, when I took my first job in Washington, her advice to me was, um, if anyone asks you if you can do something, you immediately tell them the answer is yes. And then you have to go home and figure out how you're going to deliver on that.
It's
And
really
so
funny.
that's been my attitude all along.
It's my funny. When I was a college student, I was a film major, and that's what my professor said. When if a client who wants to do something, just tell them you could do it. And so I had to learn. Someone wanted to know if I used a certain camera. I'm like, sure. And then I went to Camera Mart in New York, went there, paid them $50, and they taught me how to use it. So that is a very interesting way. It doesn't mean that you're lying. It just means that you have the confidence to know that you will know in about 2 weeks. You just need to get there. Yeah,
Yeah,
fast.
and these days, if you can't find a YouTube video on how to do something, then you probably need to create that YouTube video.
Yeah.
So yes,
So I want to ask you one more question, and that is, if you think about someone who's starting a business from the ground up, maybe a 22-year-old just at a college, or it could be an adult, not that 22-year-olds are not adults, but someone who's like just getting out of a job, got laid off, better start a company. What kind of advice would you have so they can learn what they need to do and what they should be doing based on curiosity and empathy? What should they be doing? Any recommendations?
yeah. Um, I'll say that the three things that matter that matter to me most and that I advise other people on is one, I'm a huge fan of the Michael Gerber book, The E-Myth Revisited, which suggests that, whatever it is that create the systems around it, document it all out, so that you can follow that or others can follow that. But that's one, because two, the work of business development is the hard work. And, you know, the whatever is your technical background or your particular passion or whatever it is, that might be the thing that you get paid for. But business development is the necessary work that makes that happen. So you need to get out there and figure out a business development strategy, put your foot on that gas pedal, and don't take it off. And so, even though it's hard, even though you're going to run into all kinds of no's and all kinds of people who will be discouraging in any kind of way, the first 5 times you go out and make this, it can be really discouraging. But when you get to 50, when you get to 500, you will become better at it over time. And so, for me, the best learning happens when I go out and do something enough that I gain experience about it. And then I think the last thing I would say to someone is get yourself a coach or a mentor or someone who you can check in with periodically, who can get you out of whatever rut you are naturally going to be in, because human beings, we get comfortable. And just like if you were working out at a gym and periodically you need a coach to say, you know what, your form is off. You need to work on different muscles, or you need to add a new exercise to your routine. The same is very much true in how you develop your business. You got to be able to be dynamic in your head and approach your business challenge from different perspectives as well.
Great advice. Always good talking to you, Matt. You always have some new ways of looking at things and to make sense of things. And you're just a prolific, lifelong learner. I really thanks. I learned so much from you over the years. So thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Great to be with you, Steve. Thanks.